Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we have one of our favorite guests. We have Dr. Angela Celeste May, and she is a woman of many talents. She is our clinical, organizational, and forensically trained psychologist. She is the president and co-founder of A.M. May and Associates Incorporated. She is the president and founder of Celeste Productions, the immediate past president of the Michigan Psychological Association Foundation Board. She is also an author and a musician, and she is a trustee of the Michigan Health Council. Good evening, Dr. Angie. How are you? Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Kim. It's always a pleasure to be here.
So let's get right to it. It's been a little bit of time since the last time we talked. Kids are returning to school, and there's a lot of fear and apprehension. And so as we return to routines, how do we address the fear of returning back to the classrooms? And let me take us back to spring. In Uvalde, Texas, you had a gunman who killed 19 students. And since then, well, I shouldn't say since then, but around that time, there were 200 plus mass shootings recorded in the United States. Workplaces, grocery stores, you had Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York. You've had synagogues, so places of worship. You had Dylan Roof in South Carolina at their church where he sat with them and he prayed with them, and then afterwards got up and murdered them. You have so many people who now, because as I say, this is my phrase, Dr. Angie, what in the 10 plagues is going on? We still have COVID-19, but now we have monkeypox and polio is making a comeback. But everybody from the CDC to our doctors is saying, but we all can return to normalcy. And I'm like, well, I don't know that I want to return to normalcy because there are still these diseases out here, but now people are shooting each other. My kids go to school and you know, we're not making light of this. It is a lot going on. But for your children to think about, okay, so today I need to make sure I have my crayons, my pencil, my compass, my folders, but I also need to make sure that I'm prepared for an active shooter at my school because we never know where it's going to hit. And so many places people say it could never happen here because they said that in Uvalde. We never thought that this would happen here, and it did. How, Dr. Angie, from a psychological point of view, how do we address that? Because for parents, there's a fear, and even for children, there's a fear, although they have been trained to live in this world, to deal with this world, and even for some people to say they've sort of become immune to it because it's become almost an everyday occurrence.
Mm-hmm. That, you know, there's I would say just like with most things or with many things, there are the ways to handle it that can make things worse, can you know, exaggerate an already, like you said, fearful environment. And then there are ways to deal with it that can alleviate some of that fear and stress and work towards solutions for ourselves and for our kids. So I was thinking about this in terms of like an acronym. So taking the word fear and pulling those letters from the word apart and maybe looking at it from the quote unquote negative or less helpful way to deal with it and the more positive problem solving way to deal with it. So one of the things that I think we need to be really careful of is that the first letter, which is of fear, which is F, right? So first thing I think we need to be careful about is this idea of not allowing it to paralyze us. So I think of F as fear, yes, but F as freezing, like don't let it cause us to be like just frozen in place. And that can take it can take on different shades, I guess you could say. In some ways, parents sometimes will think that they are helping their kids by, you know, going in the complete like opposite direction of it. and get paralyzed. And so they're not actually dealing. They're not talking with their kids about it. They're, they're letting the fear really kind of engulf them, which if we're not careful, that can be easy to do for any of us, dealing with fearful, scary situations that are very, very real. So the first thing I would say to not do is allow it to like freeze us in place and become paralyzed with that. And one of the ways that can appear is mentally like refusing to deal with it. Sometimes it's just like, I'm not going to think about it. I would say that's less the case with parents, because you're constantly thinking about, everything your child needs. What do I need to do to protect my child? All of that, of course. But for individuals, for people dealing with their own fears, for of all ages, don't freeze and become paralyzed where you just say, I'm not going to deal with it, because like you said, it is a reality, and that reality will catch up with us in one way or the other. And like you said, I'm not saying it's an inevitability or an eventuality that a shooting will take place, but we do live in dangerous times, whether it's shootings or other things that can happen. So like you said, we want to be careful about exactly your quote from those in Uvalde, and that people will say oftentimes is, I didn't think it would happen here. I didn't expect it. So we want to, on the positive, on the problem solving side of it, instead of freezing, we want to face it. So first letter of fear is to face it, right? So we want to face it. That means acknowledging, like you said, that it can happen. Acknowledging, I think as people will say, what is it about fear that is so fearful, that's so scary? And we know that the unknown is one of the biggest stressors, and one of the biggest things that can, really make us afraid. So facing the fact that we may not always know, when or if, but acknowledging that it does happen. And then that's like the first step towards doing things to be prepared and to do as much as we can to keep ourselves safe. So that's F for the acronym. The second one for the word fear is E, of course, F-E-A-R. So I think of the word engulf. It's sort of the opposite of freezing, whereas some people will allow it to engulf them. So their every waking thought, because this is actually, going on or in the world and in our country and in our communities, we had to be careful not to let it engulf us, where it's just, where we become hyper vigilant. And hypervigilance, is, as you know, is when you're constantly looking around every corner and jumping at every little sound. Those are the symptoms of PTSD, when you've had trauma. And we've seen that in survivors of these school shootings, office place shootings, whatever the case, because of course it is real and true trauma. And while that is the case, we still need to work not to allow it to completely take over our lives, constantly envisioning, the worst case scenario that could go on for ourselves or our children. So rather than allowing it to engulf us, we want to express. So after we face it, acknowledge it, we want to express it. And expressing it is everything from, talking about it, saying that, don't be afraid to say that you are afraid. Don't be afraid to share those emotions, because you're not alone if you feel those things. Many of us, as you were saying, Kim, living in the, I was gonna say these communities, it's just living, period. There's so much that goes on. So expressing it, talking about it, letting other people know not only that you may be feeling it, but being open. This is very, very helpful for ourselves and for our kids, being open to allowing them to express it, encouraging our kids to talk about their own fears. It's not so much that we may have all the answers, but just the act of allowing another person to, talk about it, to express it, to share how they're feeling and what's on their mind, what they're thinking about this, can be very, very therapeutic and healing in a lot of ways. And also, even just in the process of expressing it, a lot of times just talking it through with each other or like I'm always talking about, journaling or writing it down or however you express it, you begin to find some, I started to say some answers, some help with that, some ways that you can deal with that. Like, don't try to deal with it just by yourself. Talk it through with someone else. That doesn't always have to mean a professional, like a psychologist like myself, or a psychiatrist, or a counselor, although it could be, or a social worker. That can be very, very helpful. But just expressing it and giving yourself permission to. Expressing it also means emotionally expressing it. We know that fear can manifest in a lot of ways, and it can manifest in anger and raging. It can manifest in tears and crying. Different people express them in different ways, these emotions, and at different times in our lives, and depending on the circumstance, can be expressed in lots of different ways. But it's important to, people talk about let it out. There may be a time and a place for that, but allow yourself the time and space and place to do that. And so I would say definitely for parents, when it comes to their kids, modeling that behavior, letting them know it's not only okay to feel, but we all feel. That's part of being human. Expressing that, you don't want to scare your child, but you want to let them know that, we're all trying to figure this out together. So it's modeling it and showing them ways that you can deal with the fear without it paralyzing you, without it engulfing you, and maybe getting back to some sense of normalcy, like you were saying, or some sense of like living our day-to-day lives in happy ways, happy, healthy ways. The A for the word fear, FEA, on the not so helpful side, in some ways could be anger. It can be for anger. Anger, we know that it comes. We know it's a natural, normal human, and non-human for animals, emotion. And certainly when we're dealing with fear and scary situations, and especially situations that we feel we don't have control over, a lot of times anger does come up, and has come up, of course, if you have a loved one or a child who has been exposed to that, or even if, I think all of us being empathetic people, even when we're looking at the Uvaldes, we're looking at these situations, and we don't know these families at all, but we can still, feel those feelings with them. And so, yeah, that anger can come up. So anger in and of itself, I'm not putting that on the unhelpful side so much as saying that feeling it is different than living it. And that's where we can get kind of stuck. So being on the like kind of negative side, if anger, it grows to the point where you're living in it, and then that just defines your existence. That can keep us from moving forward and keep us from trying to get some positive, healthy solutions. And then also, again, we live in communities. We pass things back and forth to each other, whether we mean to or not, right? And so from a community perspective, and like holding each other up, and from the perspective of supporting each other, again, the anger, it's natural, but if you find yourself that it's just staying there and kind of like festering inside and growing, it's harming you after a while. It's harmful to you, can be harmful to the very things you're trying to work on improving. And also, we know our kids are sponges. They're absolute sponges. So they may never say a word, but they can feel that. And you may never say a word, but you can't fool kids.
Nope,
they can feel all of that. They feel it. And so again, going back to the idea of expressing it, it's important to talk about I was going to say it's important to talk about these different emotions to show and help your kids understand that these are aspects of life, and that there are ways to deal with it that can help us and not harm us. But I also want to just kind of add that it's not really, kind of a caveat, that parents need to be careful and make sure that they are talking about these things in age appropriate ways.
Yes.
That's very, very important too.
Mhm.
Depending on how young or how old your child is, you want to talk about this in ways that are going to terrify them and scare them, because we know now that little kids are not mini adults. They're not little bitty adults. And their brains and all of that, they're pretty brilliant. They're pretty brilliant human beings, but they're not able to process everything in the way that
Mhm.
adult minds can. So that's
Mhm.
always important to keep in mind too.
Mhm.
And then the last of the acronym FEAR, the word fear. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the A. I forgot the positive side of the A. So the anger part, the positive or the more helpful side, I would say, is I know people talk about channeling their anger or putting their
Mhm.
emotions into ways to try to help make some positive differences in their community. That's part of it. But I also think of A for the more helpful side is admit.
Mm.
Admitting that these emotions are human, admitting that
Mhm.
we're vulnerable. Again, another very important lesson to model and teach our kids. If they
Mhm.
see, mom and dad and grandma and uncle, acknowledging that you're no less an adult, you're no less a man, you're no less a woman or anything like that, by admitting, showing your kids it's okay to admit that you have those feelings, that, some things are scary, even for adults.
Mhm.
Um, and those are wonderful teaching. I'm looking at my little notes, my acronyms. Those are great opportunities to show them how you handle it, how you deal with it. And that crying doesn't mean that lost your mind, or that,
Mhm.
that you've given up. If you are a faith, a household of faith, and you
Mhm.
practice faith,
Mhm.
that's when you don't have to wait until then. Of course, we weave it throughout, different aspects of life. But when you talk about the power of prayer and just all of those things, in these times, this is when we lean on God, we lean on the Lord, we lean on each other, those kinds of things. So admitting the vulnerability is very, very important. And
Mhm.
and then the last one, the R, is for the less, sometimes can be less helpful side, is running away. So this is kind of akin to, at the beginning, we don't want to be frozen or paralyzed by it, but then you also don't want to run away from it so much that you
Mhm.
just are not dealing with it. And you don't mean to, but you don't want to teach your kids or pass along the idea that not dealing with it at all over time is a solution. The reason I say over time is because sometimes you need a minute. Sometimes you just need a minute to, make sure your kids are okay, go close the door and just get in the fetal position, and you'll be back, and you'll be back. So
Yes.
you'll be back.
Mhm.
It's okay. It's okay. That's self-care and all the rest.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a time to just like, I'm gonna run over here. So you can run away from it, but it's the time thing. And the minute is whatever it means for you, however much, what you
Mhm.
might need, which is very healthy. But running away, two things. One, in terms of length of time. Again, that idea of, just like with anger, these things come. It can be part of it. Going in the fetal position can be a healthy moment for you. Just do what you need to do with that.
Mhm.
Cry it out or whatever. But again, that idea of living there, and staying in that, running away all the time.
Mhm.
Um, that can take, again, that can take on like different, it can look differently. We know that substance abuse can grow out of a habit of not dealing.
Mhm.
That it could be, it may not start out that way, but you gotta be careful.
Mhm.
So like substance abuse, food, just we can use all
Mhm.
kinds of things to just run away and not deal.
Yes.
uh, so, and another thing too, ragefulness. For some people, raging, like, getting angry
Mhm.
as a regular way in which they deal or don't deal with issues. uh that's different from, maybe things are building up, and maybe you just it's more than you take, and you had that time when you just kind of just went off. That's different from ragefulness as your go-to way, that habit that you fall into of, this is how you, and finding that you're not getting resolution from that. It's not like you're, making changes from that. It's just
Mhm.
becomes a habit of way. That's a way of running away also. So, um, on the positive side of that, instead of running away from it, it's reacting to it, but reacting to the thing. It's that idea of, let me react to it based on what's really happening. That's an R. So, what does this require of me, of my resources to handle this, to try to deal with this as best I can moving forward, in a way that, again, is problem solving, can help my kids stay as safe as they can when they're not with me, help them know what to do, not just in terms of movement, like, drop and roll or whatever the drills may be, but internally, teaching your kids how to react to certain situations in ways that are self-care for them, as well as, physically in the environment, being able to do the best that they can in handling that. And also in a way that they can take with them over time as they grow. So that's my acronym for FEAR on the one side of this.
Excellent, Dr. Angie. So I want to take that acronym and let me make sure that I have it correct. So F is facing it. E is expressing it. A is admitting it. And R is reacting to it. Okay. So you gave us a great segue into our next question, because you talked about substance abuse. And for a lot of people, during COVID, there was the COVID weight gain. And many people talked about, well, I'm just at home, so I'm eating more, because you're trying to compensate for the fact that you're at home, you're more comfortable, so you're eating more comfort foods. They did statistics and studies on it and found that people were indulging more in their comfort foods, and they were saying a lot of people are putting their health at risk because they are. But in addition to that, you mentioned substance abuse. Now, substance abuse, typically we think of hardcore drugs like heroin, cocaine, something like that. But substance abuse could also be the abuse of alcohol. And it could be something as simple as, oh, you know what? That Zoom meeting schedule that I had today, I had 7 Zoom meetings and I am zoomed out. I'm going to go have a glass of wine. And every day you have a glass of wine because you are zoomed out. Or then you have to combine in-person meetings still with Zoom meetings, and maybe some responsibilities have increased because they've changed the structure of your department. And so you're stressing, you're drinking more, trying to cope. Or you're like me, you drink more coffee because you enjoy coffee, but coffee is also a guilty pleasure. And next thing you know, you're like, oh, wait, I've had 2 espressos today. I need to slow down because I'm not going to be able to rest because I'm going to be all jittery and all wired. Or you've had too much candy, too much sugar, or you say, oh, I'm going to reward myself with chocolate. And next thing you know, you've eaten half the bag and you're like, oh, wait a minute, how did that happen? Right. So I know it sneaks right up on you. So I gave those examples, Dr. Angie, because I want you to go back to something that you started to talk about. And you talked about when people are angry. And there seems to be a lot of angry people. And we know that anger and fear go together. What should a person do to help calm their minds? I know we talked about this acronym, but are there things outside of that we need to focus on, that we could turn our attentions to, that could help calm our minds and help to strengthen our minds, so that when we do, as you said, get to that R, where we're raging instead of positively reacting to whatever it is and addressing it and dealing with it, we don't do harm to ourselves?
Excellent question. I would say one of the most powerful questions, I would say it's a question, one of the most powerful questions we can ask ourselves. And this is really important to practice. It'll take some practice. It will take some practice to do it in the moment. We're all really good at hindsight. We are really good at, like you were saying, oh, wait a minute.
Right.
After half the chocolate's gone, or all the however many donuts or whatever,
Exactly.
Oh, wait a minute. So it takes some practice to do it in the moment or like a little bit before the moment. So, trial and error, it's okay to mess up. That's how we learn and grow. But asking yourself this question, and it really does go back to, it kind of goes back to the F of fear, the face it kind of thing. Asking yourself how you feel. And that sounds obvious. Like, I know how I feel. I'm angry or whatever. I'm sick and tired of Zoom, but asking it not just once, but how, think of it this way. You know how when you're talking to someone else and you can see other things going on with them, because it's always easier to see what's going on with somebody else than with ourselves oftentimes, right? So with someone else, if we ask them, and when we're seeing, we know something's going on, ask, I love it. I love it. When we ask, how are you feeling? And then they answer, and you kind of know that there's more to it. And then you'll ask again, how are you feeling? How are you really doing? And the person might get irritated, like, but it sparks the second and third time you ask, it kind of sparks, if they stay with it for a second, it kind of sparks like some deeper thought on it. That is really a powerful thing that I have found to do, internally. How am I? Okay, you're don't just stop at the surface. It's a way to get deeper, get a little deeper. Well, how am I? Okay, wait, how am I really feeling? Well, yeah, that did get on my nerves, all those and whatever. Okay, true. And then you ask, it's this habit, you kind of work on this mental habit of, but then you ask why. Why is that upsetting you so much? Well, it's tedious, it's tiresome, it's, I want to do other things. All true. But by the time each time you ask the question and get a little, okay, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? And then so once you get past well, it's obvious. Okay, well, why are you upset about it? And if it's to the degree that you've had, you're really mourning real loss, all of that's part of the conversation. But it can be a real forward, and not to push people forward before they're ready. Of course, sometimes you have to stay where you are for a minute. But it can be a way to walk at your own pace toward oftentimes what's really underneath that. A lot of times what you're raging about or getting that whine about or whatever, it's more than just 7 Zoom meetings. Yeah, you want to unwind, relax. Oh, that was just too much, whatever. Okay. But when you keep doing it, sometimes what's under that is, I feel trapped, like I don't have a choice. I feel that this is unfair. I feel, you start to get, but you'll never get some of those answers if you just stay at, that was irritating, I'm mad about it, let me unwind, and bam. So I really encourage more and it's not that you'll always know the answer right then and there, but it can really start to spark some deeper thought about it. And it's amazing, it's amazing what we have, like, deep inside, in the back of the mind, that a lot of those answers are there more than we realize, but we don't tap into it. So that's the number one thing I would say is practice asking a little sooner. And if you don't, at first it'll be after half the box is gone, or after, but keep at it, keep at it. And I find it helpful to write it down and tell people to write it down, because when you go back, it's like, oh, and then you can sort of start where you left off and then go a little deeper, but why? And then in terms of, like I was saying, the problem solving part of it. If you're asking, well, why am I so upset? Okay, well, that was annoying. Well, what's annoying about it? Well, I don't always want to sit through 7. Okay, but I feel like I'm trapped in some way. Okay, so is there anything I can do about that? Are there explore some things that you can do about that? Sometimes, as we know, people say they don't want to be on screen all the time. There are some work situations in which they require you to be on screen all the time. There are a lot of work situations in which you don't have to be on screen all the time. Explore, sometimes people feel trapped because they didn't explore or find out or ask or talk about with their supervisor or whomever. Well, you know what, I'm juggling some things, or let them know I may be off camera. I mean, off camera. And then these days with Zoom so much, a lot of people are off camera, and unless it's a major thing, that's fine. So that can give a breathing room. I mean, but you don't even get to the exploration of some alternatives if you haven't first dealt with, okay, why am I so upset about this? Let me just, and then you can start to look at, well, what would I prefer? What works better for me? Or, and then work on some compromise or whatever, but ask, don't assume, and don't leave it at the surface.
Excellent, Dr. Angie. Okay, so now I want to switch gears for children, because children have a lot of the same concerns sometimes. However, they don't often know how to voice their concerns or communicate their concerns or their needs. Is there something different, or should we take the same approach when we're talking to our kids?
Well, I think it depends on a few things. On the one, we did talk about age level, of course. The older the child, the more verbiage that they have access to be able to talk about how they're feeling. It also depends on individual personality, knowing your child, and you've got more than one kid, so how each child has her or his own way of dealing with some things. So it's really important to work with your child from where your child is, regardless of the age. So that means asking questions and then giving them room to answer or express in the way that makes sense for them, and then gently walk that fine line between asking more and encouraging them to talk. And then for some kids, you have to spend a little time, let them know that that you're there and that you care about, you want to hear what they're feeling, that it's important because we all share, etc. But then giving them space. Sometimes there's that kid that just needs space, and then you come back to it and you give it a little time. But you're building in those habits of safe ways to express. And then there are other kids, like for me, I'm just the talker. Talk about it. Talk. I just get it out. So, I was blessed with folks who listened and let me talk and asked me questions. Whereas, one of my other siblings is more quiet, but still the questions were asked. You still ask those questions, but you give them room to answer in the way they need to. And it may just be, one word answer or a couple words, and a couple of things to keep in mind. One is, we say this to parents all the time, be careful about comparing your kids. Be careful about that. The way one expresses is not going to be the way the other one does.
Exactly.
It doesn't, of course, important, right? It doesn't mean that one is, less well adjusted necessarily because they're using 2 words and the other one's 12 paragraphs. That's important. Sometimes parents make the mistake of, sometimes it's hard to separate ourselves a little bit, but can get their feelings hurt a little bit. They feel like that they don't want to share with me. It's sometimes kids, oftentimes kids don't want to disappoint their parents, or they feel that they'll let them down if they do. So all of those things to keep in mind, and you're keeping them in mind so that you can reassure your child. Same sets of things that we said, that this is natural, it's okay to feel this way, but ask them if they have any questions. You're there to answer. And a lot of times, or oftentimes, letting them know is what's important, that you're there for that and to help them, because they'll come back later, and ask questions about it or talk more about it. So the same principles, I would say, apply to kids, but you just tailor it to what the age and what the child may need, and knowing how each child expresses and deals with their own, their own issues.
And Dr. Angie, I think you're absolutely right. Both of my sons, as you talked about your superpower, about being able to talk, that is one of my superpowers. That is my oldest son's superpower. My youngest son, not so much, unless he has something specific that he wants to say. He's very deliberate in the words that he uses. And oftentimes he will say something and we all will stop and look at him and crack up laughing, because I'm like, You are 10. Where did you learn that word? And I'm not saying it's a bad word. It'll be a big word. And I can't think of anything off the top of my, he told us something. Somebody said something. I think his brother said something. And I was getting ready to admonish his brother, and he said, "Stop jumping to conclusions. You haven't examined." I looked at him, and I was like, "Oh." He was 9 when he said this, and I went, "Oh." And my oldest son just sort of had this, because he's the one that likes to do the zingers, and it's right off the top of his head. And I started cracking up. I said, "Yeah, your brother cracked on you." And he said, "He did not, Mommy." I said, "Yes, he did." He told you to stop jumping to conclusions. So now in the family, anytime somebody says something, we say, "You shouldn't jump to conclusions."
You should examine.
You should examine the situation.
Right. That's
but
right.
You bring up a great point. I think as parents, we do want to communicate with our kids. We want our kids to tell us everything until they do tell us something. We're like, wait, I didn't want to know that. And you're like, no, right. But in today's troubling times that we have, I was on Twitter today, and there was a mother who was speaking about her 5-year-old or her 4-year-old, excuse me, at a preschool. And there was a man walking down the street next to this preschool with an AR-15 slung over his shoulder. And she said he was just walking, and she said the fear. And so, when we talk about the fear is real. And I think that it's very appropriate that you said, we have to face it. We have to express it. We have to admit it, and we have to react to it. Because unfortunately, there are people on the flip side who just think, and I've had this conversation with many people, every time something happens, they said they should have had some good guys with some guns. I said, y'all keep saying these good guys with the guns, but a bullet has no name. And so if somebody is just innocent bystander, how do you justify somebody who gets shot and dies?
And there's something else too that I was talking about this as well with someone. I think it may have been my husband recently. I think it was one of those national stories where a bystander did shoot the person in that story. And everyone's so busy saying, "Oh yeah," even law enforcement, we were glad that he was there. Well, on the one hand, okay, so he stopped further damage, but no one's thinking about what we're so looking at Hollywood and everything. That's very damaging and traumatic for the person who does the shooting.
Yes.
And that leaves some baggage and some stuff that person has to deal with. You don't just, one would hope, if you care about life, that, you don't just callously I shot him up, and everything. So I think we have to be careful about, also just societally, to your point, like you were saying, these bullets have no names. And even if someone does take someone, out who is creating problems or whatever the case, then that creates a new set of issues that the person has to deal with. Too. So, yeah.
All valid points. Dr. Angie, that actually is a great way to end our podcast. So now, thank you for being here. You got to tell us what's going on at AMA and Associates, what's going on at Celeste Productions, what's happening with your books, your music. You got so much going on.
I got stuff going on. Well, thank you for asking. I so appreciate it. There is my book, Freedom: What is the Experience of Living Without Negative Self-Imposed Limitations? Excuse me. And this book, you can find it on Amazon. This is the soft cover. There's the hardcover version as well. And basically, the research that I did, published it in book form, in which I talked to different people about ways in which they felt that they weren't free to really be themselves or express themselves. It was in different aspects of their lives, whether they may have felt stuck in their personal life or in their career or emotionally or whatever the case. And these are all people, it was a small group of people, but it was a very diverse group. So we had people from early 20s to I think 70, I'll say 65, but like in the 70s, men, women, white folks, Black folks with different backgrounds. And what was so fascinating that I enjoyed about, one of the things I really loved about doing this research was that despite their very diverse backgrounds, there were key themes, 7 key themes that came out of the interviews and the research that I did, in which that they all had in common. And so that's in the book as well, talking about some 7 key things to get from feeling stuck to feeling free, or free of whatever it was that they were feeling hampered by. So it's available at Amazon.com. It's available at Ex Libris, that's the publisher. So you can look it up. Dr. Angela Celeste May, book's called Freedom. And many people who have told me that they found the book very, very, very helpful. So do check that out. As far as my company with my sister, Michelle May, that's A.M. May and Associates Incorporated. We are a counseling, consulting, and coaching company. So we do personal, professional, and creative counseling. I'm sorry, coaching, and also doctorate coaching. I offer doctorate coaching. My sister's doing counseling at this time, and I am looking through all my, all the places you can find me and everything. We at A.M. and Associates, we have, like I mentioned, we do personal and professional coaching as well as consulting and counseling. The coaching part of it, we do one-on-one personal coaching as well as group coaching. So we have a women's power group coming up that we do it twice a year, lasts for about 8 weeks or so. We meet every other week virtually, and it's a fantastic group of women doing amazing things. And we, help them get to the next level on their projects, their businesses. And one of the most wonderful things about it is the community where these dynamic women support each other. So we'll be starting the next cohort in October, mid-October. So look on Facebook at AMA and Associates. On Facebook, look on Instagram, and also our website, AMA and Associates Incorporated. .com, I should say, for the marketing that's coming up. We're going to start in a few days actually, marketing for the women's group coming up. I also next week will be marketing for starting to talk again about my men's group. I have a men's coaching group that I created specifically for Black men dealing with stress. And it's really a wonderful experience because it helps the men involved learn how they specifically, each individual person is handling the stress in their lives on multiple levels. So we look at the emotional ways in which they deal with stress, the physical ways that they react to stress, and some ways to do that more in a more healthy way. So that'll be coming up this fall also. And so yeah, just go to our website, www.amaassociates.com, to find out more about those things. With Celeste Productions, I am continuing to teach at the Marigold Conservancy here in Detroit. I teach voice and piano, and my brother offers drum lessons as well under Celeste Productions. I am continuing to write new music. I am performing. I just had the flyer. Wait, I'm looking around the flyer, but I'm performing this next week. What is the date? I am performing with Wayne County Community College District, which is, of course, those of you in Metro Detroit, if you're around, come. It is taking place on September 14th, I do believe. I want to give you the exact date, but it's going to be a wonderful art expo. So we have artists in fine art, performing arts, and visual arts who will be performing and showing their artistry. It's from noon to 3, and I'm looking that up. I believe it's on Tuesday the 14th as well. But if you go to my social media, Instagram, Angela Celesme, Facebook, Angela Celesme, Dr. Angela Celesme on Facebook, that's my music page, all of those, you will see the advertisement. So I'll be performing and doing some stuff with that coming up. And just got stuff going on. So let me tell you the last couple of things, and that's where, where to reach me. In addition to Facebook, I'm also on Twitter and Reverb Nation as well. I have a YouTube channel, Angela Celesme, and I think that's everything. And Reverb Nation, reverbnation.com, Angela Celesme. That's also where you'll see some of my music release. And my last album is on Amazon as well. It's called Reintroducing the Lady. So yes, that's the stuff that I'm doing. at least some of it. And I love the chorus in the background of your beautiful donkey.
I know.
love
They're
it.
excited. They're excited.
Yeah. Oh, I apologize. I wanted to double check my date. Yes, it's next Wednesday, September 14th from noon to 3, and that's at the downtown campus of Wayne County Community College District in Detroit. Come
Excellent.
see me and all of us performing.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Angie, for being on the Kim B. Davis Show and for talking to us about fear, returning back to school, and the importance of routines, but also being able to face something, expressing ourselves, admitting what's going on with us, and positively reacting to it. Thank you so much. You guys know that you can find me on the Thank you for tuning into this episode. You know that you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, everywhere on social media, and it's Kimberly Bachelor Davis. Bachelor is spelled BATCHELOR. You can see this show on youtube.com/Kimberly Bachelor Davis. You can hear this show on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and Wisdom. You can find out more about me as an author at kimbdavis.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you'll join us for our next episode. And as always, remember, be magnificent.